They are stealing from you. Meet me, Millennium Park, tonight at 8 p.m. near the Crown Fountain. Come alone. Those 13 words, scribbled on a torn piece of paper and slipped under a coffee cup by a trembling waitress, changed everything for billionaire Theodore Blackwood. What started as a simple note from brave Zara Williams exposed a massive criminal conspiracy led by District Manager Kevin Murphy, who had been stealing millions while terrorizing employees and threatening Zara's 6-year-old daughter, Amelia. What followed was pure magic. Theodore and Zara fell deeply in love, fought dangerous criminals together, and built a beautiful family. Theodore proposed to Zara in her hospital bed after she was kidnapped and beaten for trying to protect him. Their fairy tale wedding 6 months later at the renovated O'Malley's Diner seemed like the perfect ending, with Kevin Murphy safely behind bars and their restaurant empire transformed into a model of ethical business practices. Zara became Director of Employee Relations while pursuing her business degree. Theodore adopted Amelia, who blossomed into a brilliant, happy child. They had wealth, love, purpose, and each other. The perfect family living the perfect life. Now, 18 months later, as their second wedding anniversary approaches, life seems beautifully settled. But what if their perfect ending was just the beginning of something far more dangerous? What if Kevin Murphy was still pulling strings from his prison cell? What if 7-year-old Amelia's secret diary contains evidence that could either save their family or put them all in mortal danger? What if the criminal conspiracy goes deeper than anyone imagined, reaching into Theodore's family fortune and Zara's hidden past? And what if the truth about their seemingly perfect love story is about to be tested in ways they never imagined? Welcome to Part 2, where the Blackwood family's greatest test is about to begin. Their love story continues, but this time the stakes are higher, the enemies are smarter, and the truth about their past will either set them free or destroy them forever. Are you ready to discover what happens next? If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue.
The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwood penthouse on North Lake Shore Drive, casting golden light across the breakfast table where Theodore watched his wife help their daughter with homework. 6 months had passed since their wedding at the renovated O'Malley's Diner, and Theodore still felt amazed that this was his life. "Daddy, can you help me with this math problem?" Amelia asked, her dark curls bouncing as she looked up from her workbook. At 7 years old, she had officially become Amelia Williams Blackwood after Theodore's adoption was finalized 3 months ago. The hyphenated name had been her idea, wanting to keep her connection to her late grandfather Carlos while embracing her new family. Theodore set down his coffee and moved to sit beside her at the kitchen island. "Let's see what we're working on, sweetheart." The problem involved calculating the number of items in delivery trucks, and Theodore smiled at the coincidence. His restaurant empire had grown significantly over the past 6 months, expanding from 47 locations to 63 restaurants across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. More importantly, every location now operated under the ethical standards he and Zara had established together. If one truck delivers 150 cases to each restaurant, and there are 12 restaurants on the route, how many cases total? Amelia read aloud. "That's 150 times 12, Theodore said, watching her work through the multiplication. "What do you get?" 1,800 cases. Amelia announced proudly. "Perfect. You're getting really good at these." Zara looked up from her laptop where she was reviewing employee satisfaction surveys from their latest locations. As Director of Employee Relations, she had transformed workplace culture across the entire Blackwood hospitality group. Employee turnover was down 60%, Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and their restaurants were being featured in business magazines as models of ethical employment practices. "Speaking of deliveries," Zara said, "I've been getting some unusual reports from our managers about delivery schedules. 3 different locations mentioned receiving requests for off-schedule pickups that didn't match our vendor contracts." Theodore frowned. They had implemented strict protocols for all deliveries after discovering Kevin Murphy's theft operation. Every vendor was pre-approved, every delivery was scheduled in advance, and every transaction was documented with multiple oversight checks. "What kind of requests?" "Late-night pickups, usually around 10 or 11 p.m. The requesters claimed to be from our main food distribution partner, Midwest Supply Networks. But when our managers called to verify, Midwest had no record of authorizing the pickups." Theodore felt a chill run down his spine. Midwest Supply Networks was the company his grandmother Eleanor had partnered with 40 years ago, the partnership that had eventually grown into the massive food distribution network that supplied restaurants throughout the Midwest. That network was responsible for nearly 60% of his wealth, far more than the restaurants themselves generated. "Which locations?" he asked. "Aurora, Naperville, and the new Schaumburg location. All suburban sites with loading docks that aren't visible from main roads." Before Theodore could respond, his phone buzzed with a call from Jennifer Martinez, his executive assistant who had become indispensable in managing his expanded business operations. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to disturb your morning, but I have FBI agent Patricia Chen on the line. She says it's urgent and relates to the Kevin Murphy case." Theodore's stomach dropped. Kevin Murphy was supposed to be safely locked away in federal prison, serving a 15-year sentence for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The case had been closed 6 months ago after Kevin's conviction. "Put her through," Theodore said, catching Zara's worried expression. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Agent Chen. I need to meet with you and your wife today. We've discovered that Kevin Murphy has been sending coded messages from prison, and we have reason to believe his criminal network is still operational." Theodore put the phone on speaker so Zara could hear. "What kind of messages?" "Legal correspondence that appears routine but contains hidden instructions. We didn't catch it initially because the coding was sophisticated. Murphy has been using his legal mail privileges to coordinate activities with associates who were never identified during our original investigation." Zara reached over and took Theodore's hand, her touch steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "Agent Chen, what kind of activities are we talking about?" Zara asked. "We're not certain yet, but we've identified patterns that suggest continued criminal operations involving food service businesses. Multiple restaurant chains have reported unusual delivery requests and employee intimidation tactics similar to what Murphy used at your Chicago location." Amelia looked up from her homework, her expression more serious than any 7-year-old should have to be. "Are the bad men coming back?" Theodore felt his heart break a little. Despite their efforts to shield her from the details of Kevin's crimes, Amelia had absorbed more than they realized. She had been having nightmares occasionally over the past few months, waking up talking about bad men with cameras and scary delivery trucks. "Nobody's going to hurt our family, baby girl," Zara said softly, moving to sit beside Amelia. "Daddy and I won't let that happen." Agent Chen's voice continued through the phone speaker. "There's something else. We intercepted communications suggesting that Murphy's associates have been conducting surveillance on your family. I need to ask whether you've noticed anything unusual recently. People following you, unfamiliar vehicles in your neighborhood, anyone asking questions about your routines." Theodore and Zara exchanged looks. They had noticed a few things but had attributed them to increased media attention from Theodore's business expansion and their foundation work. "Actually," Amelia said quietly, "I saw some men taking pictures at my school." Every adult in the room went completely still. "When was this, sweetheart?" Zara asked, her voice carefully controlled. "A few weeks ago. Maybe a month. They were in a van across the street during recess. I told my teacher, but she said they were probably just parents watching their kids play." Theodore felt rage building in his chest. Amelia, why didn't you tell us about this? I did tell you. Remember, I said there were strange men watching the playground. But you said not to worry because the school has good security. Theodore did remember that conversation, but he had interpreted it as typical childhood anxiety rather than a legitimate security concern. The school did have excellent security, with controlled access and background-checked staff. But clearly, that security didn't extend to public areas around the school grounds. Mr. Blackwood, Agent Chin said, I'm going to need you to bring your family in for a security briefing this afternoon. We also need to discuss increased protection measures. After ending the call with Agent Chen, the family sat in heavy silence. Theodore looked around their beautiful penthouse, with its view of Lake Michigan and carefully decorated rooms that had become home to all of them. 6 months ago, this space had represented safety and success. Now it felt vulnerable. Mommy, Amelia said quietly, I have something else to tell you. Zara and Theodore both turned to look at her. I've been keeping a diary. Like the one you used to write in, Mommy, when you were worried about the restaurant. I drew pictures of the things that made me scared. Zara's eyes widened. What kind of pictures, baby? The men with cameras. The weird delivery trucks that came at night when we drove past the restaurants. The people who asked my friends' parents questions about our family. Theodore felt the room spinning. People have been asking questions about us? Amelia nodded solemnly. At Sophia's birthday party last month, a lady said she was writing a story about successful families in Chicago. She asked Sophia's mom lots of questions about where I go to school and what activities I do and whether you and Mommy travel a lot. Zara was already moving toward Amelia's room. Can you show us this diary, sweetheart? Amelia led them to her bedroom, decorated in purple and dinosaur themes as Theodore had promised. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook with a bright pink cover. Theodore recognized it as one of the journals Zara had bought her for practicing writing. As Amelia opened the notebook, Theodore's blood ran cold. The pages were filled with detailed drawings and observations that no 7-year-old should have needed to make. Pictures of men sitting in cars outside their building. Sketches of delivery trucks with license plate numbers carefully copied. Notes about people asking questions at school events and neighborhood gatherings. Baby girl, Zara said, her voice shaking slightly. This is incredible detective work. You noticed all these things and remembered them. Grandpa Carlos taught me to pay attention to things that don't seem right, Amelia said matter-of-factly. Before he died, he used to tell me stories about being careful and watching for people who might want to hurt our family. Theodore felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Carlos Rodriguez, Zara's father, had died when Amelia was 2 years old. But apparently, he had already begun teaching his granddaughter to be observant and cautious. How much had Carlos known about the dangers that would eventually threaten his family? Amelia, Theodore said carefully, did your grandpa Carlos ever tell you why you needed to be careful? He said there were bad people who hurt children and families, and that good people had to watch out for each other. He said if I ever saw something scary, I should tell a grown-up I trusted, but I should also write it down so I wouldn't forget. Zara wiped tears from her eyes. Your grandpa was very smart, sweetheart. And you've been very brave. Theodore's phone rang again. Jennifer's voice was tense when he answered. Mr. Blackwood, I have 3 restaurant managers on hold. They're all reporting the same thing. Men in suits asking employees about delivery schedules and wanting to know when you're planning surprise visits to locations. Transfer them to my office line. I'll take the calls there. As Theodore walked toward his home office, he realized that their 6 months of peace had been an illusion. Kevin Murphy's criminal network had never stopped operating. They had simply been more careful, more patient, and more thorough in their surveillance. But this time, Theodore wasn't going to be caught off guard. This time, he had a brilliant wife who understood business operations, a brave daughter who had been documenting threats, and the resources to fight back properly. Whatever Kevin Murphy's associates were planning, the Blackwood family would be ready for them. As Theodore ended his calls with the restaurant managers, each reporting the same disturbing pattern of strangers asking about delivery schedules and his visit patterns, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a Milwaukee area code he didn't recognize. Theodore Blackwood speaking. Mr. Blackwood, this is Ruth Williams calling from Milwaukee. I'm Zara's grandmother. Her father's mother. The voice was elderly but strong, with the same melodic quality as Zara's speech. I've been watching the news about your family, and I need to speak with Zara immediately. It's about her father Carlos, and it can't wait any longer. Theodore's heart skipped. In all their conversations about family, Zara had never mentioned having a living grandmother. Her father Carlos Rodriguez had died when Amelia was 2 years old, but Zara had always said both her parents died in a car accident when she was 12, after which her maternal grandmother Beatrice had raised her. Mrs. Williams, I think there might be some confusion. Zara's father was Carlos Rodriguez, and she's never mentioned having a paternal grandmother. That's because I told her I was dead. Ruth's voice carried 20 years of regret. After Carlos was murdered, I was so frightened that I let Zara believe I had died of grief. I've been hiding in Milwaukee ever since, too afraid to contact her, too afraid of bringing more danger to what was left of my family. Theodore felt the world tilting beneath his feet. Murdered? Carlos died of cancer. No, child. Carlos Rodriguez was poisoned, and his death was made to look like a long illness. I have proof, but I need to speak to Zara in person. Is she there? Theodore called for Zara and Amelia to join him in his office, putting the call on speaker. When Zara heard Ruth's voice identifying herself, she went completely pale and sank into the nearest chair. Grandma Ruth? But you died when I was 13. I went to your funeral. That funeral was for my sister Margaret, honey. She had cancer, and when she passed, I saw an opportunity to disappear completely. I let everyone believe it was me in that casket because I knew Carlos's killers would eventually come for the rest of us. Zara's hands were shaking. I don't understand. Dad died of cancer too. He was sick for months. Your father was systematically poisoned with small doses of a toxin that mimicked cancer symptoms. He figured it out near the end and tried to gather evidence, but by then it was too late to save him. Ruth's voice broke with emotion. Carlos called me the night before he died. He said he had hidden proof of what was being done to him, and he made me promise to keep you and Amelia safe if anything happened. Amelia, who had been listening with the serious expression she wore when processing difficult information, suddenly spoke up. Grandpa Carlos told me stories about watching for bad people. He said good people had to protect each other. That's right, sweetheart. Your grandfather was a very good man who tried to stop very bad people from hurting others. Theodore leaned forward. Mrs. Williams, who killed Carlos? And why? Carlos Rodriguez and Kevin Murphy were business partners 25 years ago. They started a legitimate food distribution company together, supplying restaurants throughout the Midwest. Your grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood, was one of their first major clients, and eventually became a partner in the distribution network. Theodore felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. His grandmother had always been vague about her business partnerships, saying only that she had good relationships with reliable suppliers. Ruth continued, for 15 years, it was a clean, profitable operation. Carlos and Kevin were like brothers. But around 2008, when the economy crashed, Kevin got desperate. He started accepting money from people who wanted to use the distribution network for moving illegal goods alongside legitimate food shipments. What kind of illegal goods? Zara asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Drugs at first, then weapons. Eventually, Kevin's new partners wanted to use the network for human trafficking. They would hide people in refrigerated trucks along with food deliveries, moving them from city to city without detection. Theodore felt sick. My grandmother's distribution network was being used for trafficking? Your grandmother never knew. Carlos made sure of that. When he discovered what Kevin was doing, he tried to convince Kevin to cut ties with the criminal organization. But Kevin was in too deep. He owed these people millions of dollars, and they owned him completely. Zara was crying now, understanding flooding her face. So Dad tried to expose them. Carlos spent months secretly documenting the trafficking operation. He took photos, copied financial records, recorded conversations. He was planning to take everything to the FBI when Kevin's partners found out about his investigation. How did they find out? Theodore asked. Kevin Murphy told them. His oldest friend, his business partner, the man he'd trusted with everything. Kevin chose money and self-preservation over 25 years of friendship. Amelia looked confused. But if the bad men killed Grandpa Carlos, why didn't they kill Kevin too? Ruth's laugh was bitter. Because Kevin became their inside man. He helped them cover up Carlos's murder, took over the distribution network completely, and spent the next 20 years expanding their trafficking operation. That's how he eventually ended up managing your restaurants, Theodore. He was positioning himself to take over your entire food service empire for his criminal partners. Theodore understood now why Kevin had been so focused on discrediting him and stealing his businesses. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about gaining control of the distribution network that his grandmother had helped build, the network that supplied restaurants across multiple states. Mrs. Williams, Theodore said carefully, you mentioned that Carlos hid proof. Do you know where? 3 safety deposit boxes. 1 in Milwaukee, 1 in Chicago, and 1 in Indianapolis. Carlos gave me the keys and account numbers the night before he died, but I was too terrified to access them. I've been carrying this burden for 20 years, watching from a distance as Zara struggled to raise Amelia alone, afraid that if I contacted her, Kevin's people would track down our family. What changed? Zara asked. Why are you calling now? Because I saw the news reports about Kevin Murphy being arrested. For the first time in 20 years, I thought maybe it was safe to come forward. But then I started reading about suspicious activities at your restaurants, about people asking questions and making threats. I realized Kevin's arrest didn't end the danger. It just made his partners more desperate. Theodore was already thinking strategically. We need to retrieve whatever Carlos hid in those safety deposit boxes. But we also need to make sure you're protected, Mrs. Williams. If Kevin's associates realize you're still alive and have access to evidence, they'll kill me, just like they killed Carlos. Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact. I know the risks, child. But I'm 83 years old, and I'm tired of being afraid. More importantly, I'm tired of watching my granddaughter and great-granddaughter live under threat from the same people who destroyed my son. Zara stood up suddenly. I want to see you. I want to see this evidence. And I want to know everything about my father that you've been hiding from me for 20 years. Zara, Theodore said gently, if we bring Ruth to Chicago, we're putting her in immediate danger. Kevin's people are already conducting surveillance on our family. Then we'll go to Milwaukee, Zara replied firmly. Today. Right now. Theodore considered the logistics. Milwaukee was a 90-minute drive from Chicago. They could be there and back in a day, assuming they brought proper security. But leaving Chicago would also mean leaving the protection of their building's security system and the familiar environment where they knew how to stay safe. Actually, Ruth said, I have a better idea. There's something I haven't told you yet. I'm not calling from Milwaukee. Where are you calling from? Theodore asked. I'm calling from the lobby of your building. I drove down this morning after seeing the news reports about suspicious activities at your restaurants. I figured if these people are already watching your family, my presence wouldn't make things any more dangerous than they already are. Theodore looked at Zara, who was already heading toward the door. Building security didn't notify us of any visitors. I told them I was Amelia's piano teacher coming for a lesson. Amazing how no one questions an elderly lady with a piano book and a bag of sheet music. Despite everything, Theodore found himself smiling. Ruth Williams had spent 20 years in hiding, but she clearly hadn't lost her resourcefulness or her determination. "Ruth," Zara said, "are you really here? Are you really alive?" "I'm really here, honey. And I'm ready to tell you everything about your father, about the evidence he died protecting, and about the inheritance that rightfully belongs to you and Amelia." "Inheritance?" Theodore asked. Carlos owned 40% of the original distribution company. Even after Kevin took over the legitimate operations, those ownership rights never legally transferred. "Zara, you've been entitled to millions of dollars in assets for the past 20 years. More importantly, as Carlos's heir, you have legal standing to demand a full audit of the distribution network's operations." Theodore realized that Ruth Williams wasn't just bringing them emotional closure about Carlos's death. She was bringing them a weapon that could destroy Kevin Murphy's entire criminal network. "Send her up," Theodore told building security through the intercom. "And Mrs. Williams? Welcome to the family." As they waited for Ruth to arrive, Theodore pulled Zara into his arms. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready for 20 years, Zara replied. "I just didn't know what I was getting ready for." Amelia tugged on Theodore's sleeve. "Daddy, does this mean I'm going to meet another grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart. A very brave grandma who loved your grandfather Carlos very much." "Good," Amelia said seriously. "I have lots of questions about Grandpa Carlos, and I want to show her my diary. Maybe she can help me understand some of the things I've been seeing." Theodore realized that this meeting wasn't just about the past. Ruth Williams might hold the key to understanding the current threats against their family, and more importantly, she might help them finally put an end to the criminal network that had been terrorizing them for months. The elevator chimed, and Theodore opened the door to find a small, elegant woman with silver hair and Zara's same intelligent, dark eyes. She was carrying a worn leather handbag and had the bearing of someone who had survived decades of worry but hadn't let it break her spirit. "Hello, Zara," Ruth said softly. "You look just like your father." And as grandmother and granddaughter embraced for the first time in 20 years, Theodore knew that their family was about to become much stronger and much more dangerous to their enemies. As Ruth Williams settled into the living room with a cup of tea, her weathered hands steady despite the emotional weight of the reunion, Amelia quietly retrieved her pink diary from her bedroom. She sat cross-legged on the carpet at Ruth's feet, her dark eyes serious as she opened to the first page. "Great-Grandma Ruth, I've been drawing pictures of scary things, just like Grandpa Carlos taught me. Maybe you can help me understand what they mean." Ruth's eyes widened as she looked at Amelia's detailed drawings. The first page showed men sitting in cars outside their building, with license plate numbers carefully written in a 7-year-old's precise handwriting. The next page depicted delivery trucks at restaurant locations during nighttime hours, with notes about wrong times and not on the schedule. "Sweet child," Ruth whispered, "your grandfather would be so proud of how carefully you've been watching and remembering." Theodore moved to look over Ruth's shoulder at the diary. "Amelia, this drawing of the delivery truck at our Naperville location. When did you see this?" 2 weeks ago when we drove past after my ballet class. The truck was there at 9 p.m., but you always said legitimate deliveries happen during the day when managers can inspect everything." Zara joined them, studying her daughter's observations with growing alarm. She's documented at least 15 instances of suspicious activity across different restaurant locations. Ruth turned the page and found a drawing that made her gasp. It showed 2 men loading what appeared to be people into the back of a refrigerated truck, their faces showing clear distress. "Amelia, where did you see this?" "Behind the Aurora restaurant 3 weeks ago. We were driving home from visiting Mrs. Patterson's sister, and I saw the people being put in the truck. They looked scared, Mommy. The men were pushing them, and some of them were crying." Theodore felt his blood turn to ice. "Why didn't you tell us immediately?" "I tried to, but you said I was probably seeing workers loading food supplies and that my imagination was making it seem scary." You told me not to worry because all our restaurants follow safety rules. Zara covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by guilt. Oh God, Theodore. We dismissed her because we thought Kevin's arrest meant we were safe. Ruth reached over and took Zara's hand. Honey, you couldn't have known. But your daughter has been documenting active human trafficking operations. This is exactly what Carlos was trying to expose 20 years ago. Theodore was already reaching for his phone. We need to call Agent Chen immediately. Wait, Ruth said firmly. Before we involve the FBI, there's something else you need to understand about that note Zara gave you 7 months ago. Everyone turned to look at her. Theodore had assumed the note contained warnings about Kevin's financial theft, but Ruth's expression suggested something far more significant. Zara sat down beside Ruth. What do you mean? The night Carlos died, he called me and told me about evidence he'd hidden. But he also said he'd taught you to recognize the signs of trafficking operations. He said if anything ever happened to him, you would know what to look for, and you would find a way to warn the right people. I was only 8 years old when Dad died, Zara said softly. But you remembered his lessons. Carlos taught you that delivery trucks shouldn't operate at night, that legitimate food service workers don't handle packages with extreme secrecy, and that real restaurant inspections happen during business hours with proper documentation. Theodore realized where this was leading. The note wasn't just about Kevin stealing money from the till. Show him the original note, Ruth said to Zara. The real one, not the simplified version you gave him to start with. Zara looked confused. I don't have the original anymore. I threw it away after Theodore and I started working together. No, you didn't. Carlos taught you to keep copies of important documents. You wouldn't have destroyed evidence of criminal activity, even after you thought the immediate crisis was over. Zara thought for a moment, then went to her purse and pulled out her wallet. From a hidden compartment behind her credit cards, she withdrew a small folded piece of paper that looked identical to the note Theodore remembered. I made a copy before I gave you the original, she admitted. It was automatic. Dad always said to document everything twice in case something happened to the first copy. Theodore unfolded the paper and read aloud. Mr. Blackwood, Kevin Murphy is stealing money, but that's not the worst thing. I've seen delivery trucks here at night with people inside instead of food. Men, women, some who look very young. They're scared and they don't speak English well. I think they're being transported against their will. I've seen this at 3 other locations: Aurora, Naperville, and Schaumburg. Always between 10 p.m. and midnight. Always with trucks that aren't on our approved vendor list. The people loading them wear restaurant uniforms, but I don't recognize them as our employees. I'm afraid to call police because Kevin has friends in the Chicago PD. I need someone with real authority to investigate. If you're reading this, please help them. ZW. The room fell silent as the full impact of Zara's original warning hit them all. You weren't just exposing embezzlement, Theodore said quietly. You were exposing human trafficking. I didn't know for certain what I was seeing, Zara replied. But Dad had taught me that when people look frightened and are being forced into trucks at night, it's never for good reasons. Ruth wiped tears from her eyes. Carlos would be so proud. You saw exactly what he had tried to document before they killed him. Amelia looked up from her diary. So the scared people I drew were the same kind of scared people Mommy saw? Yes, sweetheart. And your drawings show that the bad people never stopped what they were doing, even after Kevin went to jail. Theodore was processing the implications rapidly. If Kevin's partners have been continuing the trafficking operation for the past 6 months, that means dozens or possibly hundreds of victims have been transported through my distribution network. It also means, Ruth added grimly, that they've been using the time since Kevin's arrest to expand their operation. Without Kevin's direct oversight, they've probably become more careless, which is why Amelia has been able to document so much activity. Zara stood up and began pacing. We have to stop this immediately. We have to call the FBI and tell them everything. Agreed, Theodore said. But we also need to understand why they haven't moved against us directly. If we pose such a threat to their operation, why haven't they tried to eliminate us? Ruth's expression darkened. Because they're not done with you yet. Carlos's evidence could destroy their entire network, but they know I had access to it. They've been watching your family, waiting for me to surface. You think they know you're here? I think they've been hoping I would contact you eventually. An elderly woman traveling alone is much easier to eliminate than a wealthy family with security resources. But a grandmother visiting her family creates opportunities for them to get close to all of us at once. Theodore felt the trap closing around them. They're using you as bait to get to all of us. Which is why we need to move quickly, Ruth said. We retrieve Carlos's evidence, we turn everything over to the FBI, and we make sure this information goes public in a way that forces immediate action. Amelia closed her diary and looked up at the adults with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old. Can I help? I know which restaurants the bad people are using, and I remember the times and the truck numbers. Theodore knelt down beside her. Sweetheart, you've already helped more than you know. Your observations could save a lot of people. But I want to do more. Grandpa Carlos fought the bad people, Mommy fought the bad people, and now Great-Grandma Ruth is fighting them too. I want to be brave like everyone else in our family. Zara sat down and pulled Amelia into her arms. You are brave, baby girl. But the most important thing you can do now is stay safe so that Daddy and I can focus on stopping these people. Actually, Ruth said thoughtfully, there might be a way for Amelia to help that would also keep her safe. Theodore and Zara both looked at her sharply. Amelia's observations are evidence, but they need to be documented properly for legal purposes. If we arrange for her to be interviewed by child specialists at the FBI, her testimony could be crucial for identifying trafficking routes and timing patterns. Absolutely not, Zara said immediately. I won't put my daughter through the trauma of testifying about something this horrific. Mommy, Amelia said quietly, I'm not scared to tell people what I saw. The scared people in the trucks are probably more afraid than I am. Theodore felt his heart swell with pride and protectiveness simultaneously. Let's take this one step at a time. First, we call Agent Chen and arrange a secure meeting. Then we figure out how to retrieve Carlos's evidence safely. Then we decide what role, if any, Amelia should play in the investigation. Ruth nodded approvingly. Your husband has good strategic instincts, Zara. Carlos would have liked him. As Theodore reached for his phone to call Agent Chen, he realized that the note Zara had slipped him 7 months ago had been far more powerful than he'd ever imagined. It hadn't just exposed one corrupt manager or saved one failing restaurant. It had been the first strike in a war against an international trafficking network that had been operating with impunity for 20 years. And now, with Ruth's evidence and Amelia's documentation, they finally had the weapons they needed to win that war. But first, they had to survive long enough to use them. What do you think takes more courage? A child speaking up about what they've witnessed, or adults putting their family at risk to save strangers? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to see how the Blackwood family's fight for justice unfolds. Theodore was reaching for his phone to call Agent Chen when it rang first. Jennifer Martinez's voice was tense with urgency. Mr. Blackwood, we have a crisis. 3 major situations developing simultaneously, and I think they're coordinated. What's happening? First, the Chicago Tribune is running a front-page story tomorrow morning claiming that federal investigators have found evidence of financial irregularities at Blackwood Hospitality Group. They're saying you've been under investigation for tax evasion and money laundering for months. Theodore's stomach dropped. That's completely false. Our books are audited quarterly by 2 independent firms from 6 different investment groups, but when I traced the paperwork, they're all subsidiaries of the same holding company. What holding company? Chen Global Enterprises, based in the Cayman Islands. The offers are for 30% below market value, and they're demanding responses within 48 hours or the offers will be withdrawn permanently. Theodore felt the pieces clicking into place. Jennifer, I need you to cross-reference the timeline. When were these contracts terminated and offers made? The Midwest Supply termination was filed at 9:17 a.m. The first buyout offer arrived at 9:23 a.m. The Tribune received their evidence at 9:45 a.m. All within a 30-minute window this morning. Ruth stood up, her elderly frame rigid with anger. They're trying to destroy your business empire the same way they destroyed Carlos. Create a crisis, force a fire sale, then swoop in to buy everything at discount prices. Zara was already moving to her laptop. Theodore, if Midwest Supply terminates our distribution contract, how long can our restaurants operate? We have maybe 2 weeks of inventory on average across all locations. After that, we'd have to find new suppliers, renegotiate contracts, and establish new delivery systems. It would take months to rebuild the network. Or, Ruth said grimly, you could accept the buyout offers from Chen Global Enterprises, who would undoubtedly restore the Midwest Supply relationship the moment they took ownership. Amelia looked up from her diary, where she had been drawing during the conversation. Daddy, are the bad people trying to steal your restaurants? Yes, sweetheart. They're trying to force us to sell them for much less than they're worth. That's not fair. Can't we just find new delivery truck people? Theodore knelt down beside her. It's not that simple, baby girl. Building a new distribution network takes years, and we don't have years. Zara looked up from her laptop screen, her expression focused and determined. Actually, we might have more options than we think. I've been analyzing our supply chain as part of my MBA coursework. Midwest Supply handles 60% of our food deliveries, but the other 40% comes from 17 smaller regional suppliers. That's not enough to maintain operations, Theodore replied. No, but it's enough to maintain operations at our most profitable locations while we rebuild. More importantly, I've identified something interesting about Chen Global Enterprises. Zara turned her laptop screen toward them. Their subsidiary companies made similar buyout offers to restaurant chains in Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin over the past 2 years. In every case, the target companies were also serviced by Midwest Supply networks. Ruth leaned forward. They're systematically acquiring control of every restaurant chain that uses Carlos's old distribution network. Exactly. And look at what happened to the companies that refused the buyout offers. Zara clicked through several news articles. Sudden health department violations, suspicious fires at key locations, employee harassment campaigns, and negative media coverage about financial irregularities. Theodore felt his anger building. They're running the same playbook they used against Kevin's original targets. But here's the key difference, Zara continued. Every company that accepted the buyout offers saw their problems disappear immediately. Health department violations were resolved overnight, fire damage was quickly repaired with insurance money, and positive media coverage emerged within weeks. Because Chen Global controls the network that was creating the problems in the first place, Ruth said. Theodore's phone rang again. This time it was Agent Patricia Chen. Mr. Blackwood, I've been trying to reach you for the past hour. We have a developing situation. Agent Chen, my family and I need to meet with you immediately. We have significant new information about the trafficking network, including documentation going back 20 years. That's going to have to wait. Right now, I need you to listen carefully. We've intercepted communications indicating that there's going to be an attempt on your life within the next 24 hours. The room went completely silent. What kind of attempt? Theodore asked. Our intelligence suggests a staged accident, probably involving your vehicle or your building. The communications we intercepted mentioned eliminating the distribution problem and cleaning up Chicago loose ends. Zara grabbed Theodore's arm. We need to get out of here immediately. Agent Chin, can you provide protective custody for my family? I can provide security for a limited time, but Mr. Blackwood, there's something else you need to know. This morning, someone filed a federal complaint alleging that you've been using your restaurant empire to launder money for international criminal organizations. Theodore's blood ran cold. Based on what evidence? Financial records that appear to show irregular cash deposits, unusual vendor payments, and suspicious real estate transactions. The evidence is convincing enough that federal prosecutors are considering filing formal charges. Ruth stood up abruptly. Agent Chen, the financial records you're looking at were fabricated. I have documentation proving that the same pattern of false evidence was used to frame my son Carlos Rodriguez 20 years ago. Mrs. Williams? Ruth Williams? Our records show that you died in 2003. Your records are wrong. And the people who filed that federal complaint against Theodore are the same people who murdered my son and have been operating a human trafficking network through Midwest Supply for 2 decades. Agent Chen was quiet for a moment. I need all of you in federal protective custody immediately. Can you be ready to leave in 30 minutes? Wait, Zara said. Agent Chen, what happens to Theodore's business empire if he's arrested on federal charges? Any assets connected to alleged criminal activity would be frozen pending investigation. If charges are filed, those assets could be seized permanently. And if the business empire collapses while Theodore is in protective custody? Any legitimate buyers could acquire the assets through normal bankruptcy proceedings. Ruth looked at Theodore grimly. They're not just trying to kill you, honey. They're trying to steal everything you own while making it look like legal justice. Theodore realized they were facing a coordinated attack designed to destroy him financially, legally, and physically all at once. If he fled into protective custody, his business empire would collapse and Chen Global would acquire it legally. If he stayed to fight the charges, he'd be an easy target for assassination. Agent Chen, Theodore said, we're not going into protective custody yet. But I need you to understand something. The federal complaint against me is part of a larger criminal conspiracy. My wife documented human trafficking operations 7 months ago. My daughter has been documenting current trafficking activities, and my wife's grandmother has evidence dating back 20 years. Mr. Blackwood, if you refuse protective custody and something happens to you or your family, the FBI cannot be held responsible. Understood. But if we disappear into federal protection right now, dozens of trafficking victims will continue to suffer while the people responsible for this network take control of the very business infrastructure they've been using to transport people illegally. Zara stood beside him. Agent Chen, we're willing to cooperate fully with your investigation, but we're not abandoning the fight. These people killed my father, they've terrorized our family, and they're destroying innocent lives. We're going to stop them. Even if it costs you everything you've built? Theodore looked around the room at his wife, his daughter, and his newly discovered grandmother-in-law. Agent Chen, everything I've built is standing right here in this room. The business empire is just money and buildings. This family is worth fighting for. And the scared people in the trucks, Amelia added quietly. They're worth fighting for too. Agent Chen sighed. All right. But we're doing this my way, with full federal support and protection. And Mr. Blackwood? You'd better be right about this conspiracy, because if you're wrong, you're going to lose everything. As Theodore hung up the phone, he realized that the next 48 hours would determine whether the Blackwood family emerged victorious against international criminals, or whether they lost everything in the process. But for the first time since this crisis began, he felt confident they were making the right choice. Some fights were worth the risk of losing everything. Within 2 hours of Theodore's call with Agent Chen, the Blackwood penthouse had been transformed into a secure command center. FBI technical specialists had installed encrypted communication equipment, while plainclothes agents positioned themselves throughout the building. Agent Chen arrived with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in interviewing young witnesses of serious crimes. Ruth Williams sat at the dining table with federal prosecutors, methodically explaining 20 years of hidden evidence while they documented every detail. The safety deposit box keys lay in front of her, each one representing a piece of Carlos Rodriguez's final investigation into the trafficking network. Theodore paced near the windows, his phone constantly buzzing with calls from board members, restaurant managers, and media outlets. Stock prices for Blackwood Hospitality Group had dropped 30% since the Tribune story broke, and 3 more major suppliers had terminated their contracts citing risk management concerns. But it was Amelia who commanded the room's attention as she sat cross-legged on the carpet, her pink diary open in front of her, calmly explaining her observations to Dr. Martinez. This truck came to the Aurora restaurant on March 15th at 10:47 p.m., Amelia said, pointing to a detailed drawing. I wrote down the license plate because Grandpa Carlos taught Mommy to always remember numbers and dates when something seems wrong. Dr. Martinez nodded encouragingly. That's excellent detective work, Amelia. Can you tell me what made this truck seem wrong to you? Normal delivery trucks come during the day when the managers are there to check the food. And normal delivery people wear uniforms with company names. These people wore black clothes with no writing, and they kept looking around like they were worried about being seen. Agent Chen approached Theodore quietly. Mr. Blackwood, your daughter's observations are remarkably detailed. She's documented delivery patterns, vehicle descriptions, and personnel behavior across multiple locations over several months. Is it enough to build a case? Combined with your wife's original documentation and Mrs. Williams's historical evidence, yes. But we need to move quickly. Our intelligence suggests that Chen Global is planning to accelerate their timeline. What does that mean? It means they're not waiting 48 hours for your response to their buyout offers. They're planning to create a crisis that forces an immediate decision. Zara looked up from her laptop where she had been coordinating with restaurant managers. Theodore, I just received reports from 6 different locations. Health department inspectors arrived unannounced this morning and found violations that supposedly require immediate closure. What kind of violations? Contaminated food supplies, improper storage temperatures, and safety hazards. All at restaurants that were inspected and approved just 2 weeks ago. Ruth spoke from across the room without looking up from her documents. Same tactics they used against Carlos. Create false emergencies, force immediate compliance costs, then offer to solve the problems if you accept their terms. Dr. Martinez gently closed Amelia's diary. Amelia, you've been incredibly helpful. Your observations could help save many people who are in danger. Can I do more to help? Amelia asked seriously. Agent Chen knelt down beside her. Actually, there is something very important you could do, but it would require being very brave. Theodore immediately moved closer. Agent Chen, what are you suggesting? Amelia's testimony could be crucial for obtaining search warrants for the locations she's identified. But to make her testimony legally admissible, she would need to be interviewed formally by federal prosecutors. Absolutely not, Zara said firmly. I won't put my daughter through the trauma of testifying in a federal investigation. Actually, Dr. Martinez interjected, the interview process for child witnesses is designed to be supportive and non-traumatic. Amelia would be in a comfortable environment with trained specialists, and the process would be recorded so she wouldn't have to repeat her testimony multiple times. Amelia stood up and walked over to her parents. Mommy, Daddy, I want to do the interview. Sweetheart, you don't understand how difficult this could be, Zara said gently. I understand that there are scared people in trucks who need help. I understand that the bad people hurt Grandpa Carlos because he tried to help people. And I understand that sometimes being brave means doing scary things to protect others. Theodore knelt down to Amelia's eye level. Baby girl, if you do this interview, there might be people who get angry at our family. People who might try to hurt us. But if I don't do the interview, won't the bad people keep hurting the scared people in the trucks? Ruth Williams looked up from her documents, tears in her eyes. That child has more courage than most adults I've known. Agent Chen's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her expression growing grim. Mr. Blackwood, we have a problem. 3 children have gone missing from a Chicago elementary school this afternoon. All 3 were picked up by people claiming to be relatives, but the school has no record of authorization for early dismissal. Theodore felt his blood turn cold. What school? Lincoln Elementary, about 2 miles from your Naperville restaurant location. Amelia gasped. That's where my friend Jessica goes to school. She was at my birthday party last month. Zara immediately grabbed her phone. I'm calling Lincoln Elementary right now. As Zara spoke with school administrators, Agent Chen continued her briefing. The missing children are Maria Santos, age 8, David Kim, age 7, and Jennifer Murphy, age 9. All 3 have parents who work in food service or restaurant management. Murphy, Ruth said sharply. Any relation to Kevin Murphy? Jennifer Murphy is Kevin Murphy's niece. Her father manages a restaurant chain in suburban Chicago. Theodore realized with horror that the kidnappings were sending a message. They're targeting children connected to the restaurant industry to show they can reach anyone. Agent Chen nodded grimly. Which is why Amelia's testimony is even more crucial now. We need legal authority to raid the locations she's identified before more children disappear. Zara ended her phone call, her face pale. Jessica Williams is safe. Her mother picked her up personally and showed proper identification. But the school confirmed that 3 children were taken by people with fake authorization documents. Amelia tugged on Theodore's sleeve. Daddy, if I do the interview right now, can the FBI go look for Maria and David and Jennifer today? Agent Chen checked her watch. If we complete the interview process within the next 3 hours, we can have search warrants issued before evening. Our intelligence suggests that trafficking operations typically move people during overnight hours, so we need to act before dark. Theodore looked at Zara, seeing his own internal conflict reflected in her eyes. They had spent months protecting Amelia from the dangers connected to their fight against corruption. Now they were being asked to put her directly in the center of a federal investigation. What exactly would the interview involve? Zara asked Dr. Martinez. Amelia would sit in a comfortable room with me and 1 federal prosecutor. We would go through her diary page by page, asking her to explain what she saw and when she saw it. The entire process would be recorded, and Amelia would have breaks whenever she needed them. How long would it take? Approximately 2 hours, depending on how much detail Amelia can provide. Amelia walked over to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. After a moment, she turned back to the adults. If I was one of the scared children in the trucks, I would want someone brave enough to help me. Grandpa Carlos was brave enough to fight the bad people. Mommy was brave enough to give Daddy the note. Great-Grandma Ruth was brave enough to come here and tell us the truth. Now it's my turn to be brave. Theodore felt his heart swell with pride and break with fear at the same time. Amelia, are you absolutely sure? Once we start this process, we can't go back. I'm sure, Daddy. But I have one condition. What's that, sweetheart? I want to do the interview here in our home, where I feel safe. And I want Mommy and Daddy to be able to see me the whole time, even if you can't be in the room. Dr. Martinez smiled. That's a very reasonable request. We can set up the interview in your living room, with your parents observing from the kitchen area. Agent Chen was already coordinating with her team. We can have federal prosecutors here within 90 minutes. Dr. Martinez can begin the preliminary interview process immediately to help Amelia feel comfortable. Ruth Williams closed her folder of documents and walked over to Amelia. Sweet child, your grandfather Carlos would be so proud of you right now. You're showing the same courage that made him a hero. Will you tell me more stories about Grandpa Carlos after the interview? I'll tell you every story I remember, including the ones about how proud he was that his granddaughter was going to grow up to be someone who protects people. As federal agents began setting up interview equipment in the living room, Theodore pulled Zara aside. "Are we making the right choice?" he asked quietly. "I don't know if there is a right choice," Zara replied. "But I know that Amelia is showing us what real courage looks like. She's not asking us to protect her from the world. She's asking us to help her protect the world." Theodore looked at his 7-year-old daughter, who was calmly explaining her diary organization system to Dr. Martinez, and realized that somewhere along the way, Amelia had stopped being just his child and had become his teacher. In 2 hours, her testimony would either help save 3 missing children and dozens of trafficking victims, or it would paint a target on their family that could never be erased. But as Theodore watched Amelia's steady determination, he knew they were about to find out exactly how much courage their family possessed when everything was at stake. The interview process took exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. Theodore and Zara watched from the kitchen as their 7-year-old daughter calmly described months of documented observations to federal prosecutors, her pink diary providing evidence that could dismantle an international trafficking network. Dr. Martinez had been right about Amelia's resilience. She answered every question with remarkable composure, requested breaks when she needed them, and even corrected the prosecutors when they misunderstood details about delivery truck timing patterns. But as the interview concluded and FBI agents began coordinating immediate raids on the locations Amelia had identified, the pressure of the past week finally began taking its toll on the Blackwood family. "Search warrants approved for all 7 locations," Agent Chen announced. "Teams are moving to Aurora, Naperville, Schaumburg, and 4 distribution warehouse sites. We should have preliminary results within 3 hours." Theodore felt a mix of relief and anxiety. What about the missing children? Amelia's testimony identified 2 locations where nighttime transfers typically occur. If our intelligence is correct, the children may be held at one of those sites before being moved to secondary locations. Ruth Williams gathered her documents and safety deposit box keys. "Agent Chen, I need to access Carlos's evidence immediately. If you're raiding trafficking sites tonight, you'll need the financial records he compiled to trace money flows and identify key personnel. Mrs. Williams, our teams can escort you to the Milwaukee safety deposit box first thing tomorrow morning." Tomorrow might be too late. These people have had 20 years to develop contingency plans. Once you start raiding their operations, they'll begin destroying evidence and relocating assets. Zara looked up from her laptop where she had been monitoring news coverage of their crisis. Ruth is right. The Tribune is already running a follow-up story claiming that federal raids on Blackwood restaurant locations prove Theodore's guilt. They're spinning tonight's operations as law enforcement investigating Theodore, not rescuing trafficking victims. Theodore read the headline on Zara's screen and felt his stomach drop. FBI raids billionaire's restaurant empire. Sources say money laundering investigation expanding. They have media contacts who are helping them control the narrative, Agent Chen said grimly. We anticipated this, but it limits our ability to coordinate with local law enforcement agencies that might be compromised. Amelia, who had been quiet since completing her interview, suddenly looked up with concern. Are people going to think Daddy is one of the bad people? No, sweetheart, Zara said quickly. People who know Daddy understand that he's trying to help catch the real bad people. But Theodore could see the worry in his daughter's eyes, and he realized that their decision to fight instead of flee was affecting her in ways they hadn't anticipated. Agent Chen's radio crackled with updates from the raid teams. Team Alpha reporting. Aurora location secure. No trafficking victims on site, but evidence of recent activity. Team Beta. Naperville location empty, but finding significant documentation. Theodore felt his heart sink. They moved the victims before we got there. Not necessarily. Team Gamma is approaching the primary warehouse location now. Based on Amelia's timeline observations, transfers typically happen between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. We may have interrupted the process before victims were moved to secondary locations. Ruth stood up abruptly. We need to go to Milwaukee tonight. Right now. Mrs. Williams, it's not safe for you to travel after dark, Agent Chen replied. Agent Chen, you don't understand. Carlos didn't just hide evidence about trafficking operations. He hid evidence about specific buyers, destination cities, and financial networks spanning multiple countries. If these raids fail to locate the missing children tonight, that international evidence might be the only way to track them. Theodore looked at his wife and daughter, both exhausted from the day's stress, and felt the weight of impossible decisions. How long would the Milwaukee trip take? 3 hours round trip, plus time to access the safety deposit box, Ruth replied. But the bank doesn't open until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Unless we get a federal court order for emergency access, Agent Chen said thoughtfully. I could have authorization within 2 hours. Zara closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. So our choices are wait until tomorrow morning and hope the raids are successful tonight, or drive to Milwaukee in the middle of the night with our 7-year-old daughter while assassination attempts are being planned against our family. The room fell silent as everyone processed the stark reality of their situation. Agent Chen's radio crackled again. Team Gamma reporting. Warehouse location appears abandoned, but we're finding evidence of very recent activity. Vehicle tracks, food containers, and temporary sleeping areas that were occupied within the past 12 hours. Any sign of the missing children? Agent Chen asked. Negative. But we're finding items that appear to belong to children. Shoes, backpacks, and school supplies. Theodore felt his rage building. They were there. The children were at that location, and we missed them. Mr. Blackwood, Agent Chen said carefully, your daughter's testimony gave us the best intelligence we could have hoped for. The fact that we're finding evidence of recent activity means we're close. Close isn't good enough, Theodore snapped. 3 children are still missing, and we're sitting here debating travel schedules while traffickers move them to God knows where. Zara looked at him sharply. Theodore, don't take your frustration out on Agent Chen. She's doing everything possible to help us. Is she? Because it seems like we're always one step behind these people. First Kevin's theft operation, then the surveillance of our family, now missing children. Maybe if federal law enforcement had been more competent 20 years ago, Carlos Rodriguez would still be alive and none of this would be happening. Ruth's eyes flashed with anger. Theodore Blackwood, that's enough. Carlos died because criminals murdered him, not because law enforcement failed him. And Agent Chen has risked her career to help our family when she could have just as easily arrested you based on the fabricated evidence. Grandma Ruth is right, Amelia said quietly from her corner of the room. Agent Chen believed me when I showed her my diary. She didn't say I was too little to help or that my drawings weren't important. Theodore immediately felt ashamed of his outburst. I'm sorry, Agent Chen. I'm sorry to everyone. I'm just... You're terrified, Zara said, but her voice was cooler than usual. We all are. But that doesn't give you the right to blame people who are trying to help us. Agent Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. Mr. Blackwood, the stress of this situation would overwhelm anyone. But I need you to understand something. Your family's courage over the past week has provided law enforcement with more actionable intelligence about this trafficking network than we've gathered in 10 years of investigation. What do you mean? Amelia's observations, combined with your wife's original documentation and Mrs. Williams's historical evidence, have given us a complete picture of how this organization operates. We know their timing patterns, their transportation methods, their financial structures, and their personnel networks. Ruth nodded approvingly. Carlos spent months trying to gather that kind of comprehensive evidence. You've accomplished in 1 week what he died trying to achieve. Theodore looked around the room at his family and realized that his fear was making him forget what they had actually accomplished together. You're right. I'm sorry. What do we need to do next? Agent Chen consulted her notes. The Milwaukee evidence is crucial, but Mrs. Williams shouldn't travel tonight. However, There is something else we can do immediately. What's that? Amelia mentioned seeing unusual activity at a fourth location that wasn't included in tonight's raids. The new Schaumburg restaurant location. If her timeline observations are accurate, that location might be used for overnight operations. Amelia looked up from her diary. The Schaumburg restaurant has a really big loading dock, and it's next to a highway. I saw trucks there 2 different times when we drove past late at night. Could you provide the same kind of detailed testimony about that location? I already wrote everything down. Times, truck descriptions, and license plate numbers. Zara moved to sit beside Amelia. Baby girl, you've already done so much to help. You don't have to do another interview tonight. But what if Maria and David and Jennifer are at the Schaumburg location? What if we could save them tonight instead of waiting? Theodore knelt down beside his daughter. Amelia, that would mean another formal interview, more questions, and probably very little sleep tonight. Daddy, those kids have probably had no sleep for days. And they're probably really scared. If I can help find them tonight, then being tired tomorrow doesn't matter. Agent Chen was already coordinating with her team. I can have prosecutors here within 45 minutes for a supplemental interview focused specifically on the Schaumburg location. Ruth Williams looked at her granddaughter with obvious pride. Carlos's courage lives on in this child. As federal agents began setting up for a second interview session, Theodore pulled Zara aside into their bedroom. Are we doing the right thing? He asked. Asking a 7-year-old to carry this much responsibility? I don't think we're asking her to carry responsibility, Zara replied. I think she's choosing to use her abilities to help people, and we're supporting her choice. But what if something goes wrong? What if tonight's raid fails and the traffickers realize Amelia was the source of our intelligence? Then we deal with those consequences together, as a family. Zara took his hands. Theodore, 3 days ago I was worried about employee satisfaction surveys and completing my MBA coursework. Tonight, our daughter is helping federal agents save children from international traffickers. Life doesn't give us perfect choices. It gives us opportunities to choose courage over fear. I'm terrified that we're going to lose everything. We might. But Theodore, look what we've already gained. We discovered that you have a distribution network worth hundreds of millions that can be used for good instead of evil. I found out my father was a hero who died protecting people. Amelia learned that her voice and observations matter enough to help save lives. And Ruth learned that her family's courage didn't die with Carlos. Theodore realized that Zara was right. Regardless of what happened to his business empire or their personal safety, their family had already transformed into something stronger and more purposeful than it had been a week ago. Besides, Zara continued with a small smile, if we can survive Kevin Murphy's criminal conspiracy, a wedding with 200 guests, and Amelia's dinosaur phase, we can probably survive this too. As they returned to the living room where Amelia was calmly preparing for her second federal interview of the day, Theodore felt his marriage strengthening under pressure rather than fracturing. Some couples were broken by crisis. Others were forged by it into something unbreakable. Amelia's second interview concluded at 11:47 p.m. with detailed testimony about the Schaumburg location that sent federal agents racing through the night toward what they hoped would be the missing children's location. As FBI teams coordinated the raid, Agent Chen approached Zara with an unexpected proposal. Mrs. Blackwood, we've received authorization for something unusual. Kevin Murphy has requested to speak with you personally about your father's death. He claims to have information that could help locate the missing children. Zara felt her blood turn cold. Kevin wants to see me? Why? According to his attorney, Murphy has been following news coverage of the raids through prison media access. He knows about the missing children, and he says he has information about backup locations that weren't in the intelligence your family provided. Theodore immediately stepped closer to his wife. Absolutely not. Zara is not going anywhere near that psychopath. Mr. Blackwood, I understand your concerns, But Kevin Murphy might be our only lead if the Schaumburg raid comes up empty. His knowledge of the trafficking network's operational procedures could be crucial. Ruth Williams looked up from the documents she had been organizing. What exactly is Kevin offering? Full cooperation with the investigation, including details about international trafficking routes and financial networks, in exchange for a face-to-face conversation with Zara. It's a trap, Theodore said firmly. Kevin Murphy has spent months coordinating attacks against our family from his prison cell. Why would we trust anything he says now? Agent Chen consulted her notes. Because his situation has changed dramatically in the past 12 hours. The criminal network he's been working with has abandoned him completely. Chen Global Enterprises issued a statement this morning disavowing any connection to Kevin Murphy and claiming he acted as a rogue employee. Zara felt pieces clicking into place. They're cutting him loose because he's become a liability. Exactly. Kevin Murphy is facing the rest of his life in federal prison with no support from his former criminal associates. Cooperation with our investigation is his only option for potentially reducing his sentence. Ruth stood up and walked over to Zara. Honey, this might be your chance to get the answers you've needed for 20 years. What do you mean? Carlos died believing that his best friend had betrayed him. But what if the betrayal was more complicated than we understood? What if Kevin knows things about your father's final days that could give you peace? Theodore shook his head. Ruth, with all due respect, Zara doesn't need closure from the man who helped murder her father. She needs to stay safe and protect our family. Actually, Zara said quietly, I do need to understand what happened to my father. Not for closure, but for justice. She turned to Agent Chen. If I agree to meet with Kevin, what are the security arrangements? Federal Correctional Facility, maximum security protocols, armed guards present throughout the conversation, and complete audio and video recording of everything Kevin says. How long would the meeting take? However long you're comfortable with. You would have complete control over the conversation, and you could end the meeting at any time. Amelia, who had been quietly listening from her corner of the room, looked up from her diary. Mommy, if Mr. Kevin knows where Maria and David and Jennifer are, maybe you should talk to him. Theodore knelt down beside his daughter. Sweetheart, this is a very complicated decision that grown-ups have to make. But it's not that complicated, Daddy. If talking to the bad person for a little while could save 3 kids, then talking to him is the right thing to do. Agent Chen's radio crackled with an update from the Schaumburg raid team. Team Delta reporting. Location secured. No trafficking victims on site, but finding extensive evidence of recent occupation. Multiple children's belongings, food containers dated today, and transportation schedules indicating movement within the past 6 hours. Zara felt her heart sink. They moved the children again. Mrs. Blackwood, Agent Chen said urgently. This makes Kevin Murphy's offer even more critical. If he has information about secondary locations or transportation schedules, we might still be able to intercept before the children are moved out of state. Theodore looked at his wife, seeing the determination building in her eyes. Zara, I can't ask you to face Kevin Murphy for our family or for those missing children. You're not asking me. I'm choosing. Zara turned to Agent Chen. How quickly can you arrange the meeting? I can have authorization and transportation ready within 2 hours. The federal facility is 90 minutes from Chicago. Ruth moved to stand beside Zara. I want to go with her. Mrs. Williams, that's not advisable. Your presence could be emotionally destabilizing for both you and Kevin Murphy. Agent Chen, I've been afraid of Kevin Murphy for 20 years. I've let that fear keep me from my granddaughter and great-granddaughter. I've let it control my life and limit my choices. I want to look that man in the eye and tell him exactly what his betrayal cost my family. Theodore realized he was watching 2 of the strongest women he'd ever known make a decision that terrified him but that he couldn't argue against. If you're both determined to do this, he said, then I'm going with you. Mr. Blackwood, federal regulations limit the number of visitors, and your presence might actually compromise the effectiveness of the meeting. Kevin Murphy specifically requested to speak with Zara, not with you. Then I'll wait outside the facility. I won't let my wife and grandmother face this alone. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. That's acceptable. We can arrange for family waiting areas while the meeting takes place. Amelia stood up and walked over to her parents. Can I come too? Absolutely not, Zara said immediately. You're staying here with FBI protection where you're safe. But what if I need to answer more questions about what I saw? What if the FBI finds something at the Schomburg place that I need to explain? Agent Chen considered this. Actually, Amelia makes a good point. If we find evidence that requires clarification of her observations, having her available for immediate consultation could be valuable. Theodore felt the protective instincts warring with practical considerations. Could Amelia stay in a secure location at the federal facility while we meet with Kevin? Yes. There are family visiting areas with full security and child-appropriate amenities. Ruth Williams looked at her great-granddaughter with obvious pride. Carlos would be amazed to see how brave his great-granddaughter has become. Will you tell me more stories about Grandpa Carlos on the drive? Amelia asked. I'll tell you about the time he stood up to 3 men who were threatening a waitress at his restaurant, and about the night he called me crying because he was so proud of your mother's courage. As federal agents began coordinating transportation and security arrangements, Zara pulled Theodore aside. Are you sure about this? Theodore asked. Once we leave for that prison, there's no going back. Whatever Kevin tells you will change how you understand your father's death. I know. But Theodore, for 20 years I've lived with questions about why my father had to die and whether his death accomplished anything meaningful. If Kevin has answers that could help save those missing children, then facing him is worth the emotional cost. What if he tries to manipulate you? What if he lies about Carlos to make himself seem less guilty? Then I'll know he's lying, because I know who my father was. Carlos Rodriguez was a good man who tried to protect people. Whatever Kevin Murphy tells me about the circumstances of his death can't change that fundamental truth. Theodore pulled her into his arms. I love you for your courage, even when it scares me. I love you for supporting my choices, even when you disagree with them. Agent Chen approached them with final logistics. Mrs. Blackwood, the meeting is scheduled for 3:30 a.m. That gives us time to reach the facility and complete security protocols while maintaining Kevin Murphy's cooperation timeline. What timeline? He's offered to provide information about secondary trafficking locations, but only if the meeting happens before 4 a.m. After that, he claims the information will be useless because the transportation schedules will have changed. Ruth Williams gathered her purse and the documents she planned to show Kevin. Agent Chen, I want that man to see proof of every day I spent hiding, every birthday I missed with Zara, every holiday I couldn't share with Amelia. I want him to understand the full cost of his choices. As the family prepared to leave for what could be the most dangerous and emotionally challenging confrontation of their lives, Amelia quietly slipped her pink diary into her backpack. Amelia, why are you bringing your diary? Theodore asked. Because if Mr. Kevin really wants to help find the missing kids, maybe seeing pictures of all the scared people will help him remember more places where they might be. Theodore realized that his 7-year-old daughter understood something that the adults had missed. This prison meeting wasn't just about the past. It was about using everything they had learned to save lives in the present. As they walked toward the elevator that would take them to federal vehicles waiting downstairs, Theodore hoped that Zara's courage and Ruth's determination would be enough to break through Kevin Murphy's manipulation and finally get the truth about Carlos Rodriguez's death. More importantly, he hoped that truth would lead them to 3 missing children before it was too late. The federal correctional facility in Illinois rose from the darkness like a fortress of concrete and steel, its floodlights cutting through the 3 a.m. gloom. Theodore sat in the family waiting area with Amelia, who had fallen asleep in his arms during the 90-minute drive, her pink diary clutched protectively against her chest. Through the reinforced glass windows, he could see Zara and Ruth Williams being escorted through multiple security checkpoints toward the maximum security interview room where Kevin Murphy waited in shackles. "Daddy, are Mommy and Great-Grandma Ruth going to be okay?" Amelia asked sleepily. "They're going to be fine, sweetheart. They're very brave, and there are lots of guards to keep them safe. I hope Mr. Kevin tells them where Maria and David and Jennifer are." Theodore hoped so too, but he couldn't shake his anxiety about what Kevin Murphy might reveal about Carlos Rodriguez's death. Some truths were more painful than lies, and he worried that Zara was about to learn something that would haunt her forever. In the interview room, Zara sat across a metal table from Kevin Murphy, who looked smaller and more defeated than she remembered. The orange prison uniform and restraints couldn't hide the fact that 6 months of federal incarceration had aged him considerably. Ruth Williams sat beside Zara, her weathered hands folded calmly in her lap, but her eyes blazing with 20 years of suppressed anger. "Zara," Kevin said quietly, "I know you have no reason to believe anything I tell you, but I need you to understand that I never wanted Carlos to die." "But you let it happen," Ruth said coldly. "You chose money over 25 years of friendship." Kevin's shoulders slumped. "I chose survival over friendship. And I've regretted that choice every day for 20 years. Agent Chen, who was monitoring the conversation from an adjacent room, spoke through an intercom. "Mr. Murphy, we need information about the missing children's location. You claim to have knowledge about secondary trafficking sites." "I do. But first, I need Zara to understand what really happened to her father." Zara leaned forward. "Tell me." Carlos discovered the trafficking operation in August 2003. Not just the financial irregularities or the fake shipments, but the actual transportation of people. He had photographs, recorded conversations, and documented evidence going back months. "We know this already," Ruth said impatiently. "What you don't know is that Carlos came to me first. Before he went to the authorities, before he gathered all that evidence, he gave me a chance to walk away from the criminal organization." Zara felt her breath catch. "What did you do?" "I panicked. I owed the organization $1.2 million in gambling debts, and they owned my house, my car, and my business partnership. Walking away wasn't an option for me, but I thought maybe I could convince Carlos to look the other way until I figured out an exit strategy." "So you told the organization that Carlos was investigating them," Ruth said. "No. I told Carlos to be careful, to move slowly, to give me time to extract myself before he exposed everything. I begged him to wait 6 months." Zara was confused. "But Dad was killed 3 weeks later." Kevin's voice broke slightly. "Because I wasn't the only person Carlos talked to. He also approached Detective Ray Kowalski, thinking he could trust Chicago PD to handle the investigation properly." Agent Chen's voice came through the intercom with sharp attention. "Detective Kowalski was working for the trafficking organization?" "Ray Kowalski has been on their payroll for 15 years. When Carlos brought his evidence to the police station, Kowalski reported directly to the organization's leadership. Carlos was killed because a corrupt cop betrayed him, not because I betrayed him." Ruth Williams was crying now, 20 years of misdirected anger crumbling. "You mean Carlos was murdered because he trusted law enforcement?" "Carlos Rodriguez was murdered because he was an honest man trying to do the right thing in a system that was more corrupt than he realized. I've carried the guilt for 20 years, believing that my own cowardice contributed to his death. But the truth is, the organization would have killed him regardless of what I did or didn't do." Zara felt a strange mixture of relief and renewed anger. "If you knew Detective Kowalski was corrupt, why didn't you warn my father?" "Because I didn't know until after Carlos was already dead. Kowalski contacted me 3 days after the murder and told me exactly how Carlos had been exposed. He made it clear that I could either become a full partner in their operation or I could join Carlos in the cemetery." "So you chose to become a full partner," Ruth said bitterly. "I chose to stay alive and spend the next 20 years gathering evidence against the people who killed my best friend." Agent Chen's voice came through the intercom again. "Mr. Murphy, are you claiming you've been working undercover for 20 years? I'm claiming that I've been documenting every aspect of the trafficking organization's operations while appearing to cooperate with them. Financial records, transportation schedules, personnel lists, and operational procedures. Everything Carlos started, I continued." Kevin looked directly at Zara. "Your father's investigation didn't die with him. I made sure of that. Where is this evidence?" Zara asked. "Safety deposit boxes in Indianapolis, Detroit, and Milwaukee. The same cities where Carlos hid his evidence, but different banks. I've been waiting 20 years for the right opportunity to bring down the entire network." Ruth leaned forward. "Why now? Why are you revealing this information today?" "Because the organization abandoned me the moment federal agents started raiding their operations. 20 years of loyalty meant nothing when I became a liability. And because 3 children are missing, and I can't live with having information that could save them while keeping silent to protect myself." Agent Chen entered the interview room directly. "Mr. Murphy, we need specific locations where the missing children might be held." Kevin looked at his shackled hands. "The organization uses a rotation system for temporary holding sites. 3 primary locations in Illinois, 2 backup sites in Wisconsin, and emergency locations in Indiana. But the rotation schedule changes every 72 hours based on law enforcement activity. Which means the children were moved from Schaumburg to one of 3 possible locations: a warehouse in Cicero, a farmhouse in Elgin, or a storage facility in Rockford. But I can tell you exactly which location based on the day of the week and the current threat level." Agent Chen was already coordinating with FBI teams through her radio. Based on today's raid activity and the current date, which location would they use? "The Elgin farmhouse. It's the most isolated, has multiple escape routes, and the organization considers it the safest for high-threat situations." "How do you know the organization's current threat assessment?" Kevin managed a bitter smile. "Because Detective Ray Kowalski has been feeding them information about federal operations throughout this entire investigation. They know exactly which locations have been raided and which ones remain secure." Agent Chen spoke rapidly into her radio. "All units, priority target, Elgin farmhouse, suspect address 42750 County Road 18. Possible location of 3 missing children and unknown number of trafficking victims." Zara stood up. "Kevin, if what you're telling us is true, if you've really been gathering evidence against the people who killed my father, then why did you steal from Theodore's restaurants?" "Because the organization needed me to maintain my cover as a corrupt manager. The theft operation was small-scale compared to their trafficking profits, but it kept me embedded in legitimate businesses where I could document their larger operations." "What about threatening me and Amelia? What about your sexual harassment and intimidation?" Kevin's face showed genuine shame. "I was following the organization's orders to keep you quiet about what you'd observed. But Zara, I never intended to actually hurt you or Amelia. I was trying to scare you into transferring to a different location where you'd be safer." "By threatening my daughter?" "By making you believe I was a threat so you'd remove yourself from the situation before the organization decided you were too dangerous to leave alive." Ruth Williams studied Kevin's face carefully. "Are you telling us that your harassment of Zara was actually an attempt to protect her?" "I'm telling you that I've made terrible choices trying to balance survival against justice for 20 years. Some of those choices hurt innocent people, including Zara and Amelia. I can't undo that damage, but I can help make sure the organization finally pays for Carlos's murder." Agent Chen's radio crackled with urgent updates. "Team en route to Elgin location, ETA 12 minutes. Request all available intelligence on site layout and personnel." Kevin closed his eyes and began providing detailed information about the farmhouse: building layout, security systems, typical staffing levels, and escape routes. His knowledge was so specific and current that Zara realized he was telling the truth about maintaining contact with the organization. As federal agents raced through the night toward what they hoped would be the missing children's location, Zara looked at the man who had terrorized her family and realized that the truth was more complicated than she had ever imagined. Kevin Murphy wasn't the monster who had destroyed her father. He was a coward who had spent 20 years trying to atone for his failure to save his best friend. But regardless of his motivations, 3 children were still in danger, and Zara's family was still at risk from an organization that had killed Carlos Rodriguez for trying to protect innocent people. The fight for justice was far from over. Agent Chen's radio crackled one final time. Teams in position at Elgin Farmhouse. Preparing to breach. All units stand by. As Zara and Ruth sat in a federal prison at 4:17 a.m., listening to radio updates about the raid that could save 3 missing children, they realized that Carlos Rodriguez's legacy of courage was finally going to bring down the network that had destroyed their family 20 years ago. Agent Chen's radio crackled with the news that changed everything. Elgin Farmhouse secured. 3 children recovered alive and unharmed. Maria Santos, David Kim, and Jennifer Murphy are safe and being transported to Chicago Children's Hospital for medical evaluation. Zara felt tears of relief streaming down her face as Theodore and Amelia rushed into the interview room to embrace her. The family held each other tightly in the sterile federal facility, their week of terror finally ending with the knowledge that innocent lives had been saved. 17 additional trafficking victims recovered from the farmhouse, Agent Chen announced. Ages ranging from 12 to 47, representing 6 different countries. Kevin Murphy's intelligence was completely accurate. Kevin looked up from his shackled position at the table. What about Detective Kowalski? Arrested at his home 30 minutes ago, along with 4 other Chicago PD officers who were on the organization's payroll. Your evidence about police corruption has exposed the entire network of law enforcement collaborators. Ruth Williams approached Kevin with an expression that combined forgiveness and sorrow. Kevin Murphy, I spent 20 years hating you for something you didn't do. I won't ask you to forgive me for that hatred, but I need you to know that Carlos would be proud of what you accomplished with his investigation. Mrs. Williams, I failed your son when he needed me most. 20 years of gathering evidence doesn't erase that cowardice. No, it doesn't erase it. But it honors Carlos's memory and saves lives. That has to count for something. Agent Chen gathered her files. Mr. Murphy, your cooperation tonight has resulted in the largest human trafficking bust in federal history. 43 people arrested, 20 victims rescued, and evidence that will destroy international trafficking operations spanning 12 countries. What happens now? Zara asked. Now, your family goes home and begins rebuilding your lives. The immediate threat to your safety has been eliminated with tonight's arrests. Detective Kowalski and his associates can no longer feed information to the criminal organization, and Chen Global's leadership is being arrested through coordinated international operations. Theodore held Amelia close as she processed the news. Does this mean the bad people can't hurt anyone anymore? It means the specific bad people who were threatening our family have been stopped, Theodore explained. But there will always be other bad people in the world, which is why good people like you have to keep watching and speaking up when they see something wrong. Like Grandpa Carlos did. And like Mommy did with the note. Exactly like that, sweetheart. As the family prepared to leave the federal facility, Kevin Murphy called out to Zara one final time. Zara, there's something else you need to know about your father. She turned back to face him. The night before Carlos died, he called me and said that if anything happened to him, I should make sure you and Amelia knew that protecting other people's children was worth any sacrifice. He said that being a father meant being willing to risk everything so that all children could grow up safe. He said that. His exact words were, "If I don't come home tomorrow, make sure my daughter knows that some fights are worth dying for, because they're the only fights worth living for." Zara closed her eyes, finally understanding the full scope of her father's courage and the legacy he had left for her and Amelia. 2 years later, The Carlos Rodriguez Training Center for Young Entrepreneurs sparkled in the spring sunshine, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the Chicago skyline across the renovated warehouse district. Theodore stood at the podium in the center's main auditorium, addressing an audience of 200 business leaders, federal officials, and community members gathered for the center's second anniversary celebration. "When my wife Zara slipped me a note in a diner 2.5 years ago," Theodore began, "neither of us imagined that moment of courage would lead to the creation of a foundation that has now helped rescue over 400 trafficking victims and trained 3,000 young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds." The audience applauded as Zara joined him on stage, her MBA diploma framed behind them alongside photographs of the lives they had helped change. As CEO of the Rodriguez Foundation for Justice and Opportunity, Zara had built an organization that combined anti-trafficking work with economic empowerment programs. "The training center represents everything my father Carlos Rodriguez believed in," Zara said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "That protecting vulnerable people and creating economic opportunities are not separate missions, but two sides of the same commitment to human dignity." In the front row, 9-year-old Amelia Williams Blackwood sat between Ruth Williams and Agent Patricia Chen, who had become honorary family members over the past 2 years. Amelia wore a bright purple dress and held a small notebook where she continued her practice of documenting important events, though now she wrote about graduation ceremonies and business openings rather than criminal activities. Ruth Williams, now 85 years old, had become the center's official historian, sharing Carlos's story with young entrepreneurs and trafficking survivors alike. Her Milwaukee apartment had been replaced by a comfortable suite in the Blackwood family's new home, where she served as Amelia's after-school tutor and family wisdom keeper. "The center has graduated 847 young entrepreneurs in its first 2 years," Theodore continued, "with a business success rate of 83% and an average starting salary that is 40% above the regional median for their age group." Agent Chen, who had been promoted to head the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force, leaned over to whisper to Amelia, "Your family's work has helped us shut down trafficking networks in 34 states and 12 countries. Are there still bad people doing bad things?" Amelia whispered back, "Yes, there always will be. But there are also more good people like your family who are brave enough to fight them." Theodore's restaurant empire, rebuilt from its corporate warfare crisis, now operated 42 locations across the Midwest with a revolutionary employee ownership model. Every worker received health insurance, profit sharing, and educational support, while automated oversight systems prevented the kind of criminal infiltration that Kevin Murphy's organization had exploited. Midwest supply networks had been completely restructured under federal oversight, with new leadership and transparent operations that turned Carlos Rodriguez's distribution company into a model of ethical business practices. "But the most important measure of our success," Zara said, approaching the conclusion of her speech, "is not the number of businesses we've helped start or the amount of money we've raised. It's the fact that young people like my daughter Amelia are growing up in a world where they know their voices matter, where they understand that ordinary people can fight extraordinary evil, and where they have the courage to speak truth to power." The audience rose in applause as Amelia was invited to join her parents on stage. At 9 years old, she had become something of a celebrity in anti-trafficking circles, speaking at conferences about the importance of children's observations and the power of documentation. 2 years ago, I was scared of bad people," Amelia said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her youth. "Now I know that bad people should be scared of good people who work together. Especially when some of those good people are kids who pay attention and aren't afraid to tell adults what they see." The audience laughed and applauded, but Amelia's expression remained serious. "My mom always says that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared but doing the right thing anyway. My grandpa Carlos was scared when he tried to stop the traffickers, but he did it anyway. My mom was scared when she gave my dad the note, but she did it anyway. And I was scared when I talked to the FBI, but I did it anyway." She paused, looking out at the audience with the same intelligent eyes that had documented months of criminal activity in a pink diary. "The scared people in the trucks that I drew pictures of? They're not scared anymore because grown-ups listen to a kid with a notebook. So if you ever see something that seems wrong, Don't think you're too young or too unimportant to speak up. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones people don't expect to hear. As the ceremony concluded with the announcement of 50 new scholarships funded by Theodore's restructured business empire, Agent Chen approached the family with a final update. Kevin Murphy was released this morning after serving 2 years of his sentence. His cooperation with ongoing investigations and the evidence he provided resulted in a significantly reduced term. Where will he go? Zara asked. Witness Protection Program. The criminal organization he helped destroy has put a price on his head, but he'll be relocated with a new identity and federal support. Good, Ruth Williams said firmly. Carlos would want Kevin to have a chance at redemption. As the family walked through the training center's halls, past classrooms where young entrepreneurs learned business skills and trafficking survivors received counseling services, Amelia tugged on Theodore's sleeve. Daddy, Mrs. Henderson from my new school wants to bring her class here for a field trip. She says learning about my family's work might inspire other kids to pay attention to things that seem wrong. What do you think about that idea? I think Grandpa Carlos would like it. He always said that protecting people was something everyone should learn how to do. As they reached the center's main entrance, Zara noticed a young woman approaching hesitantly, carrying a small piece of paper in her trembling hand. Excuse me, the woman said quietly. Are you Zara Blackwood? I work at a restaurant in Oak Park, and I've been seeing some things that don't seem right. I remembered your story from the news, and I thought maybe you could help me understand what I should do. Theodore and Zara exchanged glances, recognizing the moment that had started their own journey 2.5 years ago. What kind of things have you been seeing? Zara asked gently. Delivery trucks at strange hours. People who look scared. Managers who threaten employees for asking questions. I wrote down everything I could remember, just like you did. The young woman held out the folded piece of paper, her hand shaking with the same nervous courage that Zara had felt when she approached Theodore with her original note. Amelia looked up at her parents with knowing eyes. The cycle continues. As Zara accepted the note from another brave restaurant worker, the family realized that Carlos Rodriguez's legacy would never end. As long as there were people willing to exploit the vulnerable, there would need to be people with the courage to speak truth to power. The fight for justice continued, one note at a time, one voice at a time, one act of courage at a time. And in a training center named for a murdered father who had died protecting strangers' children, his granddaughter learned that true wealth was measured not in money or buildings, but in the number of lives touched by the courage to do what was right. The scared people in the trucks were finally safe, but new scared people would always need new heroes willing to slip notes to powerful strangers and risk everything for justice. The legacy of courage would never end, because it lived in every person brave enough to say, I saw something wrong, and I refuse to stay silent. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.